here we are. Welcome, friends, to the SWBee podcast.
Are you like filming?
Yes. This is the opening with my psychopathic friend, Tiffany Hsiung.
Okay, let's start all over again.
No,
Start all over again.
We can cut it if we
Oh, no,
okay,
I want to see what I just did.
We're in.
That was so creepy.
Yeah, it was a little bit of a creepy start.
I creeped myself out.
So here we are in some test runs of the SWBee Hive podcast, your pollination station across the nation. Tiffany Hsiung, who is with me today, is a member of the Schools Without Borders Wisdom Council. Tiffany has worked with the organization since 2007, 2008. She has cut many films. She's been a storyteller in residence. She has run a number of projects for Schools Without Borders in Toronto and around the world. Tiffany also has been working on an incredible film over the past 6 years, originally called Within Every Woman, and it is now called The Apology. And I'd like to pick it up there, Tiff, and just get a sense, like, where were you on your learning journey when you decided to make this film, and what drew you to the story?
Good question, Julian. Thank you for asking me.
Anytime, my pleasure.
So you see here, it was the summer of 2009, and I was invited to go on a study tour, and I did a little bit of research and knew that I was going to meet survivors of World War II in Asia. And then I didn't really know much about World War II in Asia. I kind of grew up understanding more of the European, Canadian history of World War II, and like maybe fragments of what happened in Asia through like my parents' butchered versions of the story. And so that kind of was all the context I knew. So when I was invited to go to Asia, I was kind of excited to actually learn firsthand what the history was about and to actually, be documenting it. So it was kind of like a bonus trip for me. And nothing could have like prepared me for how I was going to feel and, what I was going to see. I met survivors of various atrocities from World War II, from Nanjing massacres to the, POW testings in Harbin. But then the one that really struck me were these little grandmothers that came to testify in these conference rooms. And, standing at like 4'10", they reminded me of my own grandmother. And I just couldn't believe that I didn't know anything about this. I was a little bit shocked. And I think what I was even more shocked about was coming back to North America and people asking what I did and and sharing it with them, and no one actually knew what I was talking about. And I think that scared me the most was when you are someone who's witnessed something to then try to tell other people what you've seen and you don't have anyone to like share that. Like you don't feel like the conversation can grow anymore because no one really knows what you're talking about. Mm-hmm. So like there was no initial...
Right. Well, it sounds like your mind was really open to all the realities of World War II in the Pacific. Mm-hmm. Was there a particular moment on that journey where you were like hearing the stories or the messages of the grandmothers that moved you into a deeper action?
I think it's when you're the physical presence of being with the grandmothers when they're choking up and trying to tell you a story that they've kept within themselves for how many years, and you can see and understand the secrecy and the shame, and so to hear someone at her age to come out bravely to talk about it in front of a bunch of strangers was what got me. And I didn't see any difference between her and a 20-year-old woman trying to share their story about the sexual abuse and the violence and the atrocities that one would go through. And and I think the gap closed for me between age and culture. I think it was a very, I wasn't watching or learning history. I was literally, it's so current what these grandmothers are going through and still going through today.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what triggered me to want to do something more about it. And, through that initial journey, I was slowly understanding, and still trying to come to terms with um, my own path of being able to tell my own story, or at least recognize my own difficulties of coming out, and talking about my own sexual abuse, and understanding how incredibly difficult it actually is. And at that time, I was a 24-year-old woman, and it was still hard for me to even talk about it. And here's an 80-year-old woman also finding it really hard to talk about it, So the question for me was always like, why? Like, what makes it so hard for us to share our story and share our experience? What perpetuates the shame, which leads to the silence? Is it us? Is it our society? Is it the people around us? And how has it not changed in like 6 fucking decades, from the war to now, and probably even pre-war as well. Obviously, it's been happening forever and still is going on.
So the film is now called The Apology, and in the world today, we see a lot of movements towards reconciliation. Certainly in Canada, with Trudeau working with the Truth and Reconciliation Committee. We see it in the United States for calls for reconciliation for 500 years of slavery. There seems to be a lot of calls for healing and reconciliation happening around the world, and this is another call for an apology. And I'm curious to hear more about like where that's at and what the significance of this apology is.
Yeah, so the film is called The Apology now, and really it's, the surface of that title is because of the current fight for an apology from the Japanese government, because they had failed to recognize that they did this to these women. They don't want to admit it. They don't want to claim that responsibility, and therefore teach it in their own textbooks. They've basically rewritten their own history to tell another narrative that doesn't include over 200,000 girls that they've kidnapped and coerced into this institutional sexual slavery.
200,000.
To over 200,000. And those estimates were calculated by the amount of comfort stations that they found, and they just estimated how many girls went through. Obviously, not many of them actually come out publicly, only a few hundred of them. Majority of them were South Korean women. But you can imagine how many women, took this to their grave or never even actually came back from the comfort stations. Anyhow, with that being said, this whole formal apology and reconciliation with these women, it's an ongoing fight. It's been 20 years now since the movement started, since the first woman, Kim Hsiung, came out. And for 20 years, they've been demonstrating and fighting for an official apology. And what they've gotten recently was this quote-unquote apology made by the foreign minister of Japan, saying that the prime minister regrets that this happened and is giving his apology. It came at a very timely, place right now in politics, where the U.S. needed Japan and Korea to come together and reconcile their differences so that they can strengthen their powers in Asia, because China and Russia have been really dominating, and they're kind of scared what can happen if they don't have their allies kind of. They basically needed peace amongst their allies. So anyways, with all this being said, this apology that recently just came out in December 2015 was not really actually an apology for these women. In fact, these women yet again got screwed over. They still yet to get a genuine, authentic apology that comes with education, comes with correcting the history that Japan has written within their own country. And Japan has, if anything, is trying to still take away that. They're trying to take away the statues that were built. They've not mentioned anything about education. They've just talked about
Right.
a fund that they would create that would, be divided among some of the survivors.
Right.
Yeah.
So, speaking of the survivors, you are telling this story through the lens of three main characters.
Mm-hmm.
Three of the grandmothers who are survivors. Can you tell me a bit about how you met these grandmothers and why you decided to focus on them?
Mm-hmm. So we've met over 35 survivors across Asia, and that was like the initial year in '09, and in 2010 we got to connect with a smaller group of survivors in the Philippines and in Korea and in China, and then from there, obviously, when we were thinking about actually telling this story and making this documentary, it was clear that a stronger story would be focusing more on specifically on three characters versus trying to tell everyone's story all collectively and giving them the same
Right.
space. So I chose Grandma Chow. I didn't actually choose. I think it was just like the natural relationship that was built,
Mm-hmm.
the natural relationship that was built that welcomed this documentation, that trust, and that,
Right.
that was naturally present with my relationship with Grandma Chow in China, in the Philippines with Adela, and in Korea with Grandma Gil. But with that being said, I also, focused on these three places and these three grandmothers because they were all part of an institutionalized sexual slavery system, but their aftermath, the aftermath, surviving all this was all quite different. In China, it was really surrounded around silence and, not wanting to talk about it, period, and just, living your life just like you don't need to launder your dirty laundry. And then in the Philippines, it was all about secrets and shame and still embodying shame and still lying to your kids what you do just in the fear of being disowned by your own children. And in Korea, it was all about strength and resilience around, not only surviving the war afterwards, but, still sacrificing yourself for this movement and cause to get an apology. So it was showing three different aftermaths,
Right.
Which I thought was really important. And to shoot it in three different locations was to show the vast, domination of the Japanese Imperial Army during World War II. They literally went all across Asia to form these comfort stations. It wasn't just one isolated place. It was wherever they were trying to colonize. So, yeah.
So this is obviously a very challenging subject to be in, with your own personal experience in unearthing a lot of the experiences and interviewing the grandmothers about what they've gone through and how they've survived. I'm curious about your process as a filmmaker and as a storyteller to be able to sit down with these grandmothers, build trust with them, open these stories, hold these stories gracefully, and be able to unearth and uncover some of the narratives that come alive in this film. Like, what was your process in supporting yourself to be able to do that, and in being in support of the grandmothers?
Honestly, I was so young and so stupid. I should have went through tons of therapy before trying to do something like this. I was advised to, but I was so stubborn. I just thought that I knew exactly what I was getting myself into. So the process started, I think, I just learned the hard way. I learned every step of the way. I learned the hard way. And when people ask me about the process, I tell them that I consider probably myself one of the worst filmmakers because my process wasn't really around filmmaking. It was really surrounded around the relationship. And in many ways, that's what it was all about. It was, for me, it was just the relationship that I had with these women and their families. And I think I think for the initial 2-3 years, I was just kind of a sponge, and it was pretty traumatic hearing the stories, visiting the locations, but also it's kind of like this weird thing. It's like you're looking into someone's life and you're seeing almost kind of like all the variables that like make this person's life the way it is, like the secrets, the lies, the shame, the community. Like you come as an outsider and you see all these puzzle pieces, and as a filmmaker you need to be objective. You just need to like just document it and be there to hold that space. But then it's really hard to stay objective when you're just like, this is so unfair, you know, it's so sad and so unfair that this that everything that you've gone through and you survived it, and yet you still need to hold shame and you still hold this secret, and you carry that with you, and that weight is on your back. And why does it have to be, you know, and you want to be there, you want to be that support. And for the grandmothers, that's, I would say that that's what I think my relationship with them transpired into. It was like I was there for them, when I was there for them as just an agency of like listening. And through that, like in China, through that, the daughter actually found out what happened to her mother because she wanted to listen in on this interview. So it's like you're literally creating those spaces with your physical presence and literally changing what one knows about their own history. And so this, for example, in China, this daughter never knew anything about her mom, just knew that something happened to her in World War II. And she was adopted by her mom, but never really knew why she was adopted. And you can imagine like learning that your mother actually had 2 kids during World War II, and those kids, like she had to kill both of those babies and she couldn't actually give birth ever again. And that's the reason why she was adopted. Like it's a shocking fact to learn about, but like why she never asked her mother why you adopted me or what happened is beyond my understanding. But then I actually, I'm like, actually, no, wait, I do understand why that is. Like, same thing happened to my mother, not wanting to ask the question of where are my parents? Why did they sell me? Like, she never asked those questions. And I feel like as a filmmaker or just as a person, as people, we need to start asking questions. We need to ask questions to our loved ones, to our elders. And I think we fail. As a society, I think we fail to do that. To ask questions means you're opening up a space for the people closest to you. Like we could just start that with our own homes. I don't think I would have kept such a secret for so long from my own parents about what the abuse I was going through. Like it just, that's what I feel like my process was with the grandmothers, was like I was offering that agency to ask those questions in that space, so that then maybe their own families and their own like things just naturally just develop, like their own desire to want to come out, or kids wanting to ask those questions to their mom, or like, you know what I mean, that curiosity is there. And it's like, and in the end, like it, you know, in the Philippines, Adela was able to come out to her son before she passed away. You know, it was like able to take off that weight on her shoulder. And I don't know, I just feel like that my process was really around focusing on my relationship with the grandmothers, and that trust, I guess, also really developed when they knew that I was coming back. I think that that's one of the main things with filmmaking in other countries, is that to have authentic relationships is really hard. Sustainable relationships more so, because they're like in the middle of nowhere and it's really expensive to get to. And for like the first 3 years when we were working independently on this project, like the flights that was like supported by SWBee and Aeroplan, like I always say, like without that support, I don't think that I could have created those real relationships as I did with the families,
Right.
And the grandmothers, because they saw us coming back.
Mm-hmm.
Usually journalists and filmmakers, they go their 1 or 2 trips, they get their stories, and that's why it's always rushed, right? Whereas and this is where maybe I'm a horrible filmmaker that didn't plan well, but like I wasn't acting like I was rushed and just give it to me, give it to me, give it to me. Okay, I gotta go. Done.
How many times do you think you visited each of the grandmothers over this process?
So in the Philippines, honestly, I can't even count how many times. It must have been over 8, 9, 10 visits.
Mm-hmm.
It must have been.
Wow.
In China as well, it's just a bunch of time. Korea, I can't even count how many times, because it wasn't just flying to Korea. I flew to Japan. I flew to Geneva. I flew with them back to Canada. I flew across the U.S. with them. Like
you were going to protests
and
with
protests.
them,
Yeah, exactly.
Solidarity, quite literally, right?
Yeah. So I had that opportunity to, and when people see that you're committed and that your physical presence is there, there's a natural like trust that's created. You're committed to.
There's this one particularly beautiful moment that I got to see in, I think, one of the trailers a couple years back, which was, I think it was Grandma Adela's birthday, and I think you and Chris are there, and you have balloons, and it's like a surprise birthday party for her. And she comes over the like ledge above her home and sees this and just like breaks down in tears, and you can just see the joy and see the happiness, and it just really shows the heart connection that you guys have created. And I see a lot of healing happening in the work that you're doing, like both on a personal level for yourself and for your family, but also for the families of the grandmothers that you've interviewed. And I see this intergenerational arc, and I'm curious about what your feelings are about supporting the grandmothers to have a legacy towards this apology. And then also I'm curious about how you hope the film will shift people's mentality and what the legacy of the film might look like, or might be.
I guess for me, I've always wanted these grandmothers to not just be known as survivors or victims and kind of cycle over that type of oppression and that label for them.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was really what I had the opportunity to witness and to see was that these women are actually, in fact, resilient heroes, going back to wise elders that hold so much strength and stories of survival. But it's beyond just the survival story. There's so much lessons in what they've gone through that can actually, they are teachers, teachers and heroes, and they can really build with what they've gone through and how they continue to survive and live after the war. I think can teach the next generation, and I think we need to go back to appreciating our elders, and that to me was the big piece that I'm hoping that these grandmothers are really actually doing is a few pieces. One is to show strength and resilience in these women and what they were able to not only live through, overcome, and still try to continue living, starting a family, so on and so forth. And to come out and tell their story is inspiring, and hopefully can encourage others to do the same thing. But also I'm hoping that they can show us as a younger generation to appreciate and beginning to ask questions, not only to our elders, but to each other. I think that's really important.
What did you yourself learn from being in this relationship with elders who you revered and respected?
I think because from North America, like coming from North America and seeing how elders are treated in and kind of ignored in like old folks home. I visit my grandmother quite regularly, and I think doesn't matter where they live and where they are around the world, they all hold such, like, think about it, like my grandmother was like 100 years old when she passed away, but like up to when she was still able to like communicate and tell stories, and like you're almost like 100 years of like of history,
Yeah.
of living history,
Right.
and the things that you've seen and able to share with me, like it's such value that I kind of like look at it like we've discarded these books.
Right.
And when I went to visit these grandmothers across Asia, it was like finding treasures of like amazing live history that can teach me firsthand what they've seen, what they've witnessed, and not just the atrocities of war, but family dynamics and culture, how they raised their family, what it was like to being a woman during that period of time, what it's like to be a woman now in present day at the age of 80, and how you fight for the attention of your own children,
Right.
and respect from your fucking, you know, grandkids.
Right.
It's very apparent to me that we've taken a really downward shift in how we appreciate and listen, and I think part of it is that we've given too much power to youth and the young mind and what it's capable. We put too much of our bet on them, and totally forgotten about who's lived through a lot of it. And actually we should be betting on that as like stories we need to retain and learn from, and not just like betting on the young and what they could come up with. But that's where we've shifted to. And for me, I think that learning from what these women have gone through, what they've seen, what they've done to overcome obstacles that are beyond our, like, we can't even imagine those type of struggles. Like, those were real. We have got it good. You know, our time, we have it good.
Right.
So why wouldn't we want to listen to the people that have gone through like the shits, you know, and that was able to survive?
There's this really interesting thread that goes through a lot of the projects that are partnered with Schools Without Borders, and that is we're always exploring the future of education, the future of learning, but oftentimes we're brought back to the ancients, we're brought back to elders, we're brought back to ancient practices of wisdom transfer and learning. And I see this project as like really creating that intersection of what are we creating in the future if we're not listening to the stories and the learnings of the past. So I'm curious about how you will, you know, what are your next steps with this, with the film, and how are you blending the future opportunity for young people to learn, for all people to learn about this, with all of the stories that are sort of lighting the way forward?
Well, I'm hoping that, you know, the legacy of this film is really going to create the important dialogue amongst the younger generation. And the fact is that people acknowledging, like, by watching these grandmothers tell their stories and their current struggles, is they can look within themselves like, oh, that's not so different than what, like, I'm currently going through. Whether it's it doesn't mean just coming out with a story with like that you've experienced sexual violence. It's like coming out if you're queer, or coming out from like some secret, or what. We all have secrets. We all have fucking secrets, and some of them we want to take to our grave. Some people are just disconnected from their family members, and they, you know, it's been so long to just connect with them. And I feel like this film is actually more so about relationship with your family than anything else. The backbone story, of course, is to fight for this apology and recognition, but, you know, the underlying tone is actually fighting for recognition of your own family, to be even seen by your own family and the people around you. So there's those different tiers and those different layers, and I think that people who watch this, I hope, can see and ask themselves how they contribute to shame, how they, yeah, we all do. I do, you do. When we don't, I think when we don't ask ourselves how we can be more open to asking difficult questions and listening to difficult stories. Like, you tend to want to turn the channel. You tend to fidget in your seat or look out or look the other way. And those initial actions are what makes it hard as someone who has that secret and has that story, fear to share it. And I'm hoping that this film can speak to that so that we can change and shift that dialogue so that it can actually be a conversation you can have at the dinner table and not feel shame. And I think about my past, and I'm like, and my mom once said to me, I forgot, it was like something she said, if I didn't think it was so difficult, I would have been able to talk to you girls a lot sooner, and been there and not felt fear in what you guys went through. And I thought about how that would have, she was my mother, she was supposed to protect me, and yet it was the exact opposite. I had to protect myself. And at the age of 8, how the hell do you do that? So for many people who go through any type of abuse or anything like that, you feel so alone by the action that was inflicted on you, and then now the aftermath. It's really this film is really shining light to the aftermath of survival. It's some would even say it's even harder, the aftermath, than the actual physical abuse, because that physical abuse has an end and the aftermath lasts a lifetime. And if we as a community, or even in your own household, don't open that space, and for the parents that have kids, I would hope that they recognize that you need to have conversations at the dinner table and not think that it's too early to talk about sexual abuse. You need to make it a natural conversation, dialogue, where I could tell mommy and daddy something happened to me, and not feel shame or feel scared, or mommy and daddy needs to be able to make that easy.
So how can we support parents and families to create a safe space for that? And is that the responsibility of the parents to create a safe space, or is it also supporting the children or youth sitting at that table to feel safe enough to open the conversation?
I think it's the parents. I think the parents have to initiate it, because those parents are raising these kids, and these kids are going to be parents one day. And that whole transfer in terms of, that conversation needs to happen somewhere. And I think for these grandmothers, again, back to the film, you're seeing 80-year-old women coming out for the first time. Fundamentally, it's just to say that it's never too late, but you also don't need to wait. You also don't need to wait till the last year of your life to unburden yourself.
So this film may support and act as a prompt. Maybe there's some tools that we can offer alongside of it to make those conversations amongst family more fluid or more available. When you mentioned taking this film back to the grandmothers and showing it to them, and I feel like that will be a really powerful moment, and hearing some of the reflections.
So it's been a while. Definitely, the whole process of making the film was a huge learning journey in itself, to understanding who I was, just my intentions when I first started, my naive belief that the film could be made in a year and a half to then I remember
6 years later.
6 years later. I guess I was naive to believe that you could race through and document and make this poignant film about this history. But it was, the filming itself and the stories that came out, the current day stories that came out. It's not so much the past stories. It was not so much of what they went through and that aspect of it, but it was more I was actually seeing that was currently happening in their
Right.
family life
Right.
was so complex that I couldn't just ignore that part of the story. And that's where the shift came for me. It was like, I'm either just going to make a film about the past of what they experienced and say, and now they're looking for an apology, or I'm going to actually focus more on their contemporary stories of what they're going through within their families today.
Right.
And by doing so, that it couldn't have been less than 5 years of production, you know?
Right.
It needed to be there to just be. Can't force through that. So that was that decision. And obviously, I think it would have been a lot less painful in terms of, because it was always like this unrealistic end date that I had for myself.
Yeah.
That wasn't realistic. Should have just been more open.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like you're in the process of opening this project and recognizing the gravity of the history, and then sort of like surfing the ripples of what is reverberated from that history. You're exploring both the past and the present, and as a result, what could be future implications of this.
Absolutely.
So that's some beautiful work and some time traveling, and I don't know, just to, as we wrap up this chat, is there a piece of advice that you would give yourself today, is like if you were to start this project over again? So if you were to talk to yourself 6 years in the past, what piece of advice would you offer?
I would turn around. Run, what are you doing? No,
there's a couple pieces of advice.
Yeah, I mean, I would tell like Tiffany 6 years ago to, if you are going to do this, accept time. Just accept time, and that you're not on a race, and that would ease the pushing people to doing things faster. And if you could just be okay and be patient. I would tell her that before she starts. And I would tell her to be kind to herself, and that, there's no such thing as perfect. And to love herself. And then the last piece, I would just say, like, you need to better plan before you decide to walk that long journey. Like, see the steps a little bit further ahead of you and not just the end result. Because then you'll know how much work is actually necessary for you to do. Otherwise, you're going to be in a hellish post-production with tons of footage that you really more than enough footage.
Right.
If you better planned out the things that you needed or the exploration that you're really looking for before you start shooting, that could save you a lot of pain in the future when you're cutting something up. That's for sure.
Some good advice.
Yeah, I would say so.
Well, thank you so much, Tiffany, for sharing about this learning journey. I'm excited to hear more and be at the premiere, and to continue building this narrative and spreading it and finding ways to engage more people.
Yeah, so like that's what I'm hoping to do, is to share that with the grandmothers as the last step of the learning journey for me. Or there's never actually
Maybe
last
end of this chapter.
Oh yeah, next chapter, second chapter, volume 2. And let me see your head next to mine, see who's bigger.
Yours looks bigger from the Yeah, you just gotta use the perspective. I have a massive head though, so
My head's
that's
not
why I
far
try and
off.
keep it back here. You know what's kind of cool about the interview is that your head's been like centered in this plant, so it looks like it's like part of like
Like
a
this?
sunshine. There's like a tropical sunshine
Ew.
coming.
I look like Lisa Simpson. Every March day and night.
Okay. Tiffany, thank you for this wonderful podcast.
Peace.
Join us next time on the Beehive Pollination.